The news arrived that Henry's international branch office was on the verge of bankruptcy. Suddenly, the man who said he loved me deeply brought another woman home. No matter how much I protested, he remained indifferent. Even pointed her finger at me and cursed. Ethan and Luna were childhood sweethearts. If your awful old man hadn't forced Ethan to marry you, he and Luna would have been together years ago. Now that your awful old man is bankrupt, are you still clinging to my son? Let me tell you, my son is still saving you some face by allowing you to remain the lady of the Hayes household. Otherwise, if you're kicked out, you'll have nowhere to go. Listening to Margaret, I simply smiled, said nothing more, and started packing my things. What they didn't know was that Henry's supposed bankruptcy was merely a false rumor spread to mislead his competitors. I never imagined that the first ones to turn against me would be Ethan and his family. Grace, let me tell you, your family is bankrupt now, so you'd better drop that diva attitude. What's more, Luna and I were childhood sweethearts. If your father hadn't forced me to marry you back then, I never would have. Now, if you behave, you can still be the lady of the Hayes household. Otherwise, if I throw you out, you'll have absolutely nothing. Ethan looked at me, his voice laced with menace. Yet, hearing Ethan's words, I simply laughed. If I recalled correctly, it was he who begged my family to allow him to marry me back then. At that time, Henry was completely unwilling to agree. It was only after Ethan's persistent pleas, and even after he signed several agreements, that Henry finally relented. I still remember that day, Ethan kneeling before me, swearing he would love me deeply and obey my every word for the rest of his life. Moved by Ethan's devotion, I cried tears of gratitude, and it was from that day forward that I fully accepted him. After our marriage, I went even further, caring for Ethan and managing the household for him. Relying on my father's connections, I helped his company thrive. I had believed that he and I would live happily ever after. But I never imagined that on the very day Henry's supposed bankruptcy news broke, Ethan would bring Luna into my home. Moreover, the mother and son brazenly began to threaten me. In that moment, my disappointment in Ethan reached its absolute peak. Seeing that I remained silent, Luna, standing beside Ethan, looked at me and softly said, "Gracie, you forced Ethan to marry you and have tormented him for so many years. Isn't that enough? Gracie, all I ask is to be by Ethan's side. I have no other demands. Ethan's official wife will certainly still be only you," Luna said, looking at me in that moment. And, standing nearby, pointed her finger at my nose and declared, "Grace, are you still not satisfied? Just think, your father is already bankrupt. If you go back now, you'll likely have nothing. Only by staying in the Hayes residence can you have anything. R is kindly taking you in, so don't be ungrateful." I laughed incredulously at their words. "In that case, then, Ethan, let's get a divorce," I said, looking at Ethan. As my words fell, Ethan's face visibly darkened. Beside him, Margaret immediately snorted coldly, "Grace, what did you say? Grace, you need to understand your current situation. Our family is pitying you, so don't be ungrateful." Margaret looked at me, speaking coldly. I shook my head and said, "I don't need your pity," I said, my tone flat. I knew Ethan wouldn't dare divorce me. Firstly, because of the many agreements he had signed with Henry back then, divorcing me would come at an exceptionally high price. It was for this reason that he wanted to keep me in the Hayes residence. But now, how could I possibly do as he wished? I looked at Ethan before me and stated calmly, "Ethan, let's get a divorce." "Grace, what did you say?" Ethan's face instantly turned grim as he retorted, "Let me tell why." "Oh Grace, this is absolutely impossible. Ethan, I want a divorce, and you can't stop me." I looked at Ethan, my voice calm. After all, he had signed an agreement with Henry, and now that I wanted a divorce, Ethan couldn't prevent it. But I didn't expect Ethan, in that moment, to glare at me with a dark expression and say, "You want a divorce? Fine, but you can't take a single thing. You'll leave with nothing." When I heard his words, my eyes widened instantly. Then, I chuckled and said, "Do you think that's possible? Ethan, you seem to have forgotten your agreement with Henry." When I uttered that sentence, the Hayes mother and son's faces immediately turned several shades darker, and even Luna looked at me with a hint of malice. Suddenly, Margaret rushed forward and delivered a slap to my face. The slap was exceptionally forceful, sending me sprawling to the floor. "You jinx! Your family is bankrupt, yet you still want a share of my son's property? How do you have the nerve to ask for money?" Looking at Margaret before me, I calmly said, "Ethan, how could he have earned so much all these years if not for relying on my father's connections? What's more, if it weren't for the business deals my family brought him back then, would he have the wealth he has now? I looked at Margaret and said coldly, since we're getting a divorce, then naturally the assets must be clearly divided. No sooner had I spoken than Margaret lunged forward and slapped me several more times. I was beaten until I lay prostrate on the floor, my face burning with pain. You jinx. I knew no good would come of Ethan marrying you, and now you even want a share of my family's money. Dream on, she said, hitting me several more times. At that moment, I turned to look at Ethan and asked coldly, Ethan, are you just going to let your mother hit me like this? Ethan merely glanced at me with cold eyes and said indifferently, Grace, you can have a divorce, but you'll leave with nothing. How Eve? For now, you'll stay here at home. After saying that, he turned to Margaret and said, Mom, keep an eye on her. Don't let her leave our house. Hearing that, my eyes widened instantly, looking at Ethan in disbelief. He actually intended to trap me in his house. It's about time. Margaret, at that moment, glared at me and said coldly, her family is bankrupt, and her awful old man is busy right now. He won't have time to care about her. We'll lock her up and see what she can do. As she spoke, she gave me a few more slaps. I looked at Ethan and said urgently, Ethan, do you realize that confining my freedom is against the law? Hearing my words, Ethan merely gave me an indifferent look, then rushed out. Seeing his reaction, my heart sank to rock bottom. I knew he wouldn't listen to me. He simply intended to do as he pleased. Margaret, seeing me, sneered and grabbed me, dragging me quickly toward a room. She held me tightly, pulling me into the room. At the same time, she confiscated my phone to prevent me from calling for help. You'll stay here, and if you don't cooperate, I'll make sure you regret it. Margaret glared at me viciously before leaving. And I, at that moment, could only stay in the room. Ethan looked at me and said coldly, Grace, if you had been cooperative, I could have continued to support you. But you simply don't know what's good for you. Ethan, aren't you afraid Henry will come looking for trouble? I looked at Ethan, my voice cold. Grace, you're overthinking it. Henry is too busy saving himself right now. Hearing this, Ethan sneered, don't you think about how much trouble your father is facing right now? Once his company goes bankrupt, how many people will come after him? Will he still have time to care about you? With that, Ethan said coldly, for now, you'll just stay at home and behave. He finished speaking, then turned and left, with Margaret and Luna behind him. The two looked at me triumphantly, then directly closed my door. And I, at that moment, sat blankly in the room. I hadn't imagined Ethan could go to such lengths. Now, I was even locked in his house. Thinking back to just a few days ago, when he held me close, intimately talking about our future plans, I found it utterly laughable. Only now did I understand that the perfect love I had yearned for had never existed from the start. And all Ethan ever wanted were the resources from Henry. As soon as he learned of Henry's bankruptcy, he immediately cast me aside. However, I wasn't worried, because only I knew that Henry wasn't actually bankrupt. All the news was just a facade. Henry had once told me that he would return for me in about 3 days, and all I needed to do was endure 3 days at the Hayes residence. 3 days would pass quickly. As evening approached, I opened my room door, only to see 2 people standing by my door. Ethan had hired them, supposedly to protect me, but in reality, to monitor me. I tried to leave the room, but they blocked my way, ordering me back inside. I could only return to my room. They didn't bring me any food that entire night. The next day, it was as if they had forgotten about me. They didn't even bring me food. I was so hungry I felt dizzy and faint. If it weren't for a few crackers I still had in the room, I would have starved. When I opened my room door and rushed out, I happened to see Margaret and Luna sitting at the dining table, eating and chatting happily. As soon as they saw me, their faces turned exceptionally cold. Margaret even said frigidly, "What is this jinx doing out? Get back inside." Hearing her words, I couldn't help but find it absurd. Yesterday, she was holding my hand, calling me her best daughter-in-law. Now, she was calling me a jinx. I'm hungry. I looked at Margaret and said, I need to eat. A jinx like you, wanting to eat? Get back inside. Hearing this, Margaret looked at me coldly and retorted. I looked at Margaret, not making a scene, but instead turned and ran to my room. I knew they couldn't possibly let me starve to death. However, I didn't expect that it would be more than 3 hours before Margaret finally came in. She carried a bowl, and inside was a pile of dog food. Seeing the contents of the bowl, I was filled with disbelief, even looking at Margaret with astonishment. I had thought she would at least prepare something a normal person would eat for me, but I never imagined she could be so malicious. What good food does a jinx like you deserve? Looking at me, Margaret said coldly, "You're only fit to eat this dog food." After saying that, Margaret simply threw the dog food onto my table and turned to leave. I didn't eat that bowl of dog food. Instead, I sat in the room with a cold expression. My body slowly curled up on the bed, my stomach aching from hunger. Eventually, I drifted into a deep sleep. The next morning, I was forcibly pulled up by Margaret. She still held that bowl of dog food. As she pulled me up, Margaret even forcibly pried open my mouth. "You jinx. You still won't eat. What else do you want to eat if not this? I'm telling you, this is all you deserve," she said, directly pouring it into my mouth. I struggled desperately, trying to push Margaret away, but as soon as I did, my arm was immediately pinned down. It was Luna. She grabbed my hand and said with a smile, "Gracie, don't blame me. Auntie is doing this for your own good. How can you not eat?" Hearing that, I struggled even more fiercely. Since childhood, I had grown up cherished by my family, never having suffered such indignity. But now, I was being treated like this. Just as I tried to struggle again, Margaret delivered another slap to my face. The slap was so hard it almost made me faint. Having eaten nothing all night, I was already experiencing low blood sugar, and Margaret's slap nearly knocked me unconscious. At that moment, I didn't even have the strength to struggle. Just then, Ethan walked in. Seeing me being treated T's way by Margaret and Luna, he merely frowned. I looked at Ethan and urgently cried out, "Ethan, I agree to a divorce, just let me go." I knew I had to agree, otherwise, Ethan would never release me. But upon hearing my words, Ethan looked at me with a cold face and said, "Don't think I don't know what you're planning. You just want to run out and sue me. I'm telling you, you won't leave our house." Listening to Ethan, my face instantly changed. And at that moment, my scalp suddenly stung. Margaret grabbed my hair and ruthlessly dragged me onto the bed. Looking at Margaret and Luna before me, I knew they had no intention of letting me go. They truly intended to kill me. Just as I felt despair, suddenly, a loud sound came from outside the door. "Where is my daughter? Where have you hidden my daughter?" The moment I heard that voice, I immediately shouted urgently, "Henry, I'm here." Inside the room, Ethan and Margaret's faces instantly changed. Especially, who was trembling with fear. He was exceptionally afraid of Henry. In fact, on normal days, he wouldn't even dare speak loudly in front of Henry. Now, hearing Henry shout, he immediately tensed up. "Son, what are you afraid of? He's just a bankrupt old man now," Margaret said calmly. "We don't need to be afraid of him." Hearing this, Ethan took a deep breath, then turned and glared at me viciously. At that moment, the sound outside the door grew louder, and the next second, the door was heavily slammed open. I saw Henry rush in with several men. When saw the situation in the room, and Margaret forcefully stuffing dog food into my mouth, his face immediately darkened. His gaze even fixed on the slap marks on my face. I saw the anger flickering across Henry's face, and he now strode quickly towards Margaret. "Old hag, what are you doing?" Margaret looked at Henry approaching her and shouted nervously. "Let me tell you, old man, you're bankrupt now, you have nothing. If you dare touch me, I'll have my son sue you to death." Hearing that, Henry laughed incredulously. He looked at Margaret with a cold smile, then suddenly delivered a hard slap across her face. At the same time, he turned to Ethan. Ethan's face changed. He forced himself to remain calm as he looked at Henry and said, "Mr. Henry, I know you're bankrupt. If you cause trouble in my house, I'll call the police." "Call the police?" Hearing this, Henry chuckled. "All right. Go ahead and call the police," he said, pointing to my face. "I saw clearly the kind of treatment my daughter suffered in your house. Now, it's not you who will call the police, but I who will pursue this to the fullest extent of the law." Henry's words filled Ethan's face with terror. He still wanted to speak, but the next moment Margaret shouted directly, "Old man, who do you think you are? You have no money now. Do you have money to file a lawsuit? Let me tell you, our family is richer than yours, so calling the police is useless." Henry looked at Margaret and smiled coldly. "Call the police then," he said, turning to me and quickly walking to my side, speaking softly. "Gracie, I'm sorry, Henry came late." "Henry, I'm fine." I held back my tears and said, "Henry, they said you were bankrupt, then immediately brought this woman home. They also gave me dog food, and I haven't eaten for 2 days." I sobbed out my grievances, and as Henry listened to my crying, his face grew darker and darker. He turned to look at Ethan. At that moment, Henry's face was filled with a cold smile. "Gracie, don't worry, Henry will avenge you." Henry called the police, and soon, the officers arrived. Henry recounted all my experiences of the past few days. Ethan tried to argue, but my physical state made any denial impossible. Ultimately, I was taken to the hospital. The doctor examined me, determining I had only minor injuries. Aside from very low blood sugar, there were no other significant issues. At the hospital, I ate quite a bit and felt much better. I intended to be discharged, but Henry firmly refused. He insisted I continue to rest and recover at the hospital. Henry also informed me that he had defeated his competitors. Our family's company had not only avoided collapse but had even advanced further. At that moment, looking at me, his face was full of self-reproach as he said, "Gracie, I'm sorry. I never imagined that because of my affairs, you would suffer such immense hardship." Listening to Henry, tears streamed down my face. "Henry, this has nothing to do with you. It's Ethan's fault," I quickly interjected. "What's more, if it weren't for you, I would never have realized what kind of person Ethan truly is." I looked at Henry, my voice tinged with resolve. "Henry, I want him to pay the price." "Of course." Hearing this, Henry immediately nodded. "How can my daughter suffer so much injustice?" "Gracie, rest assured, Henry will not let this matter go." Listening to Henry, I felt a great sense of relief. I knew Henry would have a way. After instructing me to rest well, Henry left the hospital. He returned in the evening and told me that Ethan had been released. "Margaret claimed that she was responsible for abusing you, so Ethan faced no charges." Hearing's words, I laughed incredulously. "Gracie, even though he's out, you don't need to worry. The evidence is irrefutable. Ethan committed adultery and even tried to harm you, that much is certain." Henry looked at me and said, "At the very least, the agreement he signed with me stipulates that if he does this, he must leave with nothing." Henry comforted me. "I've already instructed our lawyer to file a lawsuit." Hearing that, I actually relaxed. Then, I looked at Henry and said, "Henry, I want to handle this myself." Since had been arrested, what about Ethan and Luna? Even if Ethan had to leave with nothing, I still felt it wasn't enough. The experiences of these past few days had made me realize that Ethan was truly prepared to starve me to death. After all, if I died, the agreement he signed with Henry would be completely void. At that point, he could even claim I had died of an illness. I naturally couldn't let this matter go. Hearing my resolve, Henry nodded and said, "I'll give you the lawyer's number and arrange for bodyguards. Don't worry. My daughter will not be bullied by others like this." Hearing's words, I nodded, then looked at him gratefully. "Henry, thank you." Henry, hearing this, smiled and shook his head. "I never liked Ethan before, but you did. Now that you've seen Ethan for who he truly is, that's not a bad thing. It's a good thing I arrived in time to save you." Listening to Henry's words, my eyes filled with regret. If I had known earlier that things would turn out this way, I never would have married Ethan. That same evening, I completed the hospital discharge procedures. At the same time, Henry also told me he had many matters to attend to. After all, he had just defeated his competitors, so he naturally had a lot on his plate. The reason he rushed back was because he had called me repeatedly and received no answer. Henry was worried about me, which was why he was so anxious. When left, he gave me a key. He told me he owned a mansion there, which he had bought in case Ethan and I ever argued and I had nowhere to go. However, back then, Ethan and I were exceptionally sweet to each other, so he had never given it to me. Now, that house was naturally for me to live in. Furthermore, he had arranged for several bodyguards for me. With these bodyguards, my safety was assured. After he rushed overseas, I contacted the lawyer. The lawyer told me that Henry had handed over all the documents, and he would proceed with prosecuting Ethan. Additionally, we have applied to freeze Ethan's company account. He cannot access a single penny right now. The lawyer on the phone said, "Margaret has confessed to confining and abusing you, which carries at least a 5-year prison sentence." The lawyer on the phone stated, "Margaret directly took all the blame, which surprised me somewhat. However, I soon understood why. Because called me. Gracie, I was wrong." As soon as I answered the phone, I heard Ethan's voice. "Gracie, I was really just momentarily misguided. Please forgive me." At the police station, Ethan had already learned everything. Henry was not only not bankrupt but had even expanded his company. He was now filled with immense regret, yet utterly helpless. He could only plead with me. "Ethan, do you really think I'll believe you now that you're saying all this to me?" I said with a cold laugh. Hearing my words, Ethan fell silent for a moment. Then, Ethan spoke. "Gracie, I promise I will love and cherish you wholeheartedly from now on. I'll make Luna leave and never come back. However, my mother is getting old, so could you forgive my mother?" Listening to Ethan's voice on the phone, I couldn't help but laugh out loud. "Ethan, your entire family harmed me so much. Do you really think I would forgive any of you?" Your mother is in prison, and she can forget about ever getting out in this lifetime. As for you, I'm sorry, but your troubles are just beginning, I said coldly. And hearing my words, Ethan urgently said, Grace, I know I made a mistake, but can't you just forgive me this once? My mom is so old. She used to be very good to you. I listened to Ethan and smiled without speaking. Ethan, it's not necessary. Do you think I'll still trust you? After saying that, I hung up the phone directly. I even blocked Ethan's number. After that, I never paid him any mind again. In the following days, the lawyer informed me that Ethan had been constantly trying to inquire about me, but to no avail. His company was not only frozen, but the lawyer had provided so much material, including ample evidence of my financial contributions to Ethan's business. Combined with the fact that I was Ethan's wife and the agreements Ethan had signed, it was clear that Ethan would almost certainly leave with nothing. It was for this reason that Ethan had been desperately trying to find me during this period. But I couldn't be bothered to deal with Ethan, after all. He had absolutely no options left. One day, the lawyer informed me that I could go sign the divorce agreement. Ethan had agreed to the divorce. He had no choice but to agree. After all, if he didn't, his account would remain frozen, and he wouldn't be able to access a single penny. By agreeing to the divorce, Ethan would, on the contrary, receive a small portion of money. I saw Ethan at the county's office. He looked exceptionally haggard. When he saw me, his emotions became extremely agitated, and he lunged forward, wanting to grab me. But as soon as he rushed up, he was immediately restrained by my bodyguards. Grace, I truly know I was wrong. Let's not get divorced, okay? He looked at me, pleading urgently, Grace, Luna and I have broken up. I promise I'll be devoted to you from now on. I merely gave Ethan a cold glance and said indifferently, Ethan, I'm here today to sign the papers. As for anything else, it simply doesn't matter anymore. After I finished speaking, I looked at Ethan, and at that moment, his face was exceptionally grim. Then, he could only sigh and say, I understand. Ethan said nothing more, but quietly nodded. Finally, as I watched him sign the divorce agreement, it seemed as if all his strength had been drained. Grace, can you forgive my mother? She's getting old. He turned to me, pleading urgently. But I merely gave Ethan an indifferent look, then turned and walked away. I received all the company shares and the mansion Ethan had owned. As for Ethan, he received nothing except for the little over $1 million he had in his private account. That very day, I sold both the company and the mansion. With the money, I prepared to leave directly. Before I departed, I found a private investigator and instructed him to look into Ethan. I told him that if Ethan committed any illegal acts, he should notify me immediately. The private investigator immediately nodded. After that, I embarked on my journey home. When I returned home, Henry showed me exceptional care, and I settled in at home with peace of mind. Under his protection, I also cast aside those past experiences. But I didn't expect that just a week later, the private investigator called me. Ms. Grace, the Ethan you asked me to investigate, well, there's no need to investigate him anymore. On the other end of the phone was the private investigator's voice. He told me that Ethan had died in his rental apartment that morning. When I heard that, I was stunned, even somewhat disbelieving. All of Ethan's money was swindled away by Luna. He went to confront Luna, but she brought a group of people to beat him up. During the conflict, Ethan was beaten to death. Listening to the private investigator, I was momentarily dazed and asked, what about Luna? Was she arrested? Yes, Luna was arrested. I thanked the private investigator and sent him a generous bonus. However, I asked him to continue monitoring Luna's news. But I didn't expect that just 2 months later, he called me again. He told me that the prison Luna was taken to was the same prison where Margaret was incarcerated. Upon learning that Ethan had been killed by Luna, Margaret, the moment she saw Luna, lunged at her in a frenzy. Ultimately, she and Luna fought each other to the point of severe injury. By the time they were taken to the hospital, both were beyond help. Hearing that, I smiled. Perhaps, this was karma. Thank you for listening to today's story. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share it with your friends. We look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. Feel free to share your views, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more exciting stories. See you next time.